First of all, we do not owe any taxes, period. We made a deal with the state of Oklahoma to be tax exempt for 20 years with tax abatements. In addition, there are hundreds of companies that came into this state for the last 25 years under trust agreements that have not paid taxes under those agreements, and we are the only company in the state of Oklahoma, to my knowledge, that has been billed for taxes prior to 1980. Under trust agreements that have not paid taxes under those agreements, and we are the only...
7, 6, 5.
That was the scene yesterday on the Capitol steps. Hundreds of Christian college students lobbying the Senate to pass a constitutional amendment to allow school prayer. But not everyone sees the benefits of the measure.
Being from Oklahoma and watching it all, has everyone in Washington gone crazy? Don't they know what the harm a prayer in school, a voluntary or silent or anything can do?
3 years ago, Joanne Bell and Lucille McCord took on the Little Axe, Oklahoma School Board in court to protest a weekly voluntary religious service in the junior high school. Bell's house was burned to the ground the day she filed suit in court, and while she cannot prove there was a connection, she's confident it was because she opposed school prayer.
There is no way I can prove who burned my home. If the FBI can't find out and the fire marshal of the state can't find out, I can't find out. I have my suspicions, which I'm not allowed to say, but it was definitely the people in the community that wanted us out.
If I don't pray, if everybody in my class
somebody's going to be looking around saying, well, she didn't pray. Oh,
that's
go out
right.
and talk. No.
The case of the two Oklahoma women is just another example of the continuing exchange this week between opponents and supporters of the school prayer amendment. The debate outside on the Capitol grounds is just as intense as the debate inside on the Senate floor. Bob Petrick, Action 4, Washington.
After 11 years, the Myriad Convention Center is showing real signs of deterioration. A recent $9 million roofing job helped solve a leaky roof problem, but not before pieces of the ceiling were washed away. Officials are doing what they can to keep the 1 million square foot building intact. Time has also brought about a damaging shift in the facility. Floor repair alone would cost $400,000. The floor was built to withstand unlimited load capacity, but not constant wear and tear. Some of the problems also stem from vandalism. Just about every other month, windows have to be replaced. One official says failure of a recent 1-cent sales tax increase hurt the chances of speeding up improvements.
The people at City Hall are aware of it. I mean, they know that there's a problem, but we can't do anything without the funds, and they can't do anything without the funds. That's the reason it was so urgent that we tried to get the 1-cent sales tax, and it didn't happen.
There are a lot of events held at the Myriad that are big money makers, but a lot of that money goes into the city's general fund and not back into the building. Until officials can come up with a way to finance a facelift for the Myriad, there may be a lot of first-class acts appearing in what is becoming a second-class facility. Ed Stewart, Action 4.
We'll begin to change that type of attitude that it is okay to drink and drive. We feel that starting in the high schools and working through as college students, that if we can get to the root of the problem and make it, I guess, uncool to drink and drive, that will be the solution to our problem, or the start of a solution.
Okay.
We also asked a question about who would run best against Ronald Reagan. 35% of them said that Mondale would. 23% said that Hart would, but another 1/3 of them, 33%, said none of them would, that Reagan would beat anybody.
Now, I bet you've heard a lot of folks complain about their joints hurting when they say the weather's going to change, that they don't even have to watch the weather forecaster. Well, there really may be some fact in that observation. A sudden change in barometric pressure may very well affect the arthritis patient. But let me tell you, there's a lot of facts we don't know about arthritis yet. But what we do know about arthritis is really important. Rheumatoid arthritis is the kind that affects the smaller joints of the body, such as the hands and the feet. It affects twice as many women as men. Women who do repetitious handwork, such as needlepoint or crocheting, are common rheumatoid arthritis victims. The first affected area is usually the thumb.
There is a tremendous amount of pressure that is exerted across a very small joint at the base of the thumb.
Now, when arthritis begins, the thin membrane surrounding the joint becomes inflamed and then swollen. This leads to inflammation of other parts of the affected joint.
Some of the early symptoms of arthritis that one could readily recognize are stiffness and pain in various joints of the body. And in rheumatoid arthritis, most noticeably, it would be early morning hours when one first awakens. The feeling of stiffness, aching, and pain in joints is most noticeable.
Now, you may notice some swelling as well. If these symptoms do occur, doctors usually recommend that you rest the joints that are bothering you. Now, another pretty good idea is just a good soak in a warm tub of water. Next time, we'll talk about some of the more serious manifestations of rheumatoid arthritis. I'm Dr. Red Duke. Now, if you live a long time, and I sure hope you do, you're going to experience some form of arthritis. Now, in most circumstances, it's just a nuisance. But for a few, it's really a painful burden. For those folks, hot soaks and bed rest is not sufficient treatment. Rheumatoid arthritis is probably the most painful and crippling kind of arthritis. It usually occurs in the smaller joints, such as those of the hands and the feet. If this disease continues to progress, the joints can become more and more painful and deformed. Now, if this condition progresses to the point that you see on these pictures, to near or complete disuse of the tiny joints in the hand, they can actually be replaced at operation with small artificial joints. Now, this surgery can relieve the pain for the most part and improve the cosmetic appearance of the hand. People usually gain back much of the ability that they enjoyed in their hands after this operation.
One doesn't really add strength per se, but the functional realignment of the hand and the ability to more usefully employ their hands makes the patient feel that they are therefore stronger.
Now, the vast majority of folks who suffer from arthritis have what we call degenerative joint disease or osteoarthritis. That simply means the joints are just worn out. Now, if you're having a little bit of trouble loosening those joints up in the morning, you might talk to your doctor about it. I'm Dr. Red Duke. Now, if you've ever listened to any country western songs, you've heard them talk about cowboys getting old early, being bent and broken and stiff. Fact is, they really are. Now, in medicine, we call this osteoarthritis or degenerative joint disease. Now, obviously, a body can only take so much of this kind of action and abuse. Cowboys get osteoarthritis in all joints, but early in the upper neck and lower back. As far as the rest of us are concerned, these weight-bearing joints are the ones that take the biggest beating, like the hips and the knees. The first sign of osteoarthritis is pain.
But the pain has to be significant, and it has to be there quite frequently, like every day. And then especially if it hurts at rest, that is a significant kind of pain.
Now, with the exception of just use, we don't know the cause of osteoarthritis. For some reason, however, the tissue around the joint breaks down and literally erodes away. All of us are going to get it if we live long enough. Now, osteoarthritis is usually worse in people that are overweight. They're just carrying too much around on those old joints. Exercise is good for osteoarthritis, but remember, only certain kinds of exercise.
Probably the better type exercises are non-weight bearing, such as swimming, in which you use all your muscles, yet you don't use any of your joints, so to speak.
Now, osteoarthritis may be crippling in these guys as well as a lot of other folks. But for the most part, those of us that live long enough, and I hope we all do, we're just going to have to learn to live with osteoarthritis. Just a few more aches and pains. I'm Dr. Red Duke.
Homosexuality is an ungodly act, it's an unnatural act, it's an unclean act. We have hospitals all over this country today that won't take AIDS victims because they do not have the capability to isolate patients. And yet we're going to condone homosexuals in our classrooms with our children.
Advocated homosexuality in front of their students, in front of the class. I want to add to this, our children from these type of perverted people.
This year, normally, as you know, the supplemental.
Homosexuality is an ungodly act, it's an unnatural act, it's an unclean act. We have hospitals all over this country today that won't take AIDS victims because they do not have the capability to isolate patients. And yet we're going to condone homosexuals in our classrooms with our children.
No one would argue that many of Oklahoma City's streets are in need of repair. But there is much debate on what streets need to be fixed first with the money available. In 1976, voters approved a 1-cent sales tax to ensure residential streets would be resurfaced every year. But this year, the City Council wants to do something different. Officials voted to use some residential street money for repairing major arterial streets, and one city councilman objects to the funding switch.
I tell you, if we don't spend the money fairly over the city based on need, then we'll never avoid that problem. It'll go on forever. There'll never be development northeast. There'll never be development southeast of any magnitude. The development's going to go where we're spending the money for new water lines, new sewer lines, new streets, new fire stations, new everything. You can't come down here on one Tuesday and complain because there's an apartment going in your ward and you don't want any more folks. And on the next Tuesday come down here and say, but we want all our streets paid.
The $5 million set aside for street resurfacing will be divided equally among all 8 wards. Officials say they were forced to find money for repairing arterial streets because the last sales tax increase was voted down. As one city councilman put it, until all city roads are fixed, there will continue to be street fights. Ed Stewart, Action 4.
The blood bank at Oklahoma Memorial Hospital receives about 30,000 units of blood a year. The blood that moves through here has been drawn from the Oklahoma Blood Institute, which in turn collects blood donations from all over central Oklahoma. How likely is it that someone can get AIDS through a blood transfusion?
There were 3 million patients that were transfused by blood products last year, 1983, and of those number of patients that were transfused, 18 contracted AIDS. And of those 18, they were all in the endemic areas of this country.
Endemic areas include San Francisco, New York, Miami, and New Jersey, where the chance of contracting AIDS through a blood transfusion is 1 in 150,000. There are blood tests being developed at Stanford University to test blood for AIDS. Those tests measure the blood's general resistance to disease, but they're expensive.
There's no need to do it here, and it would make the cost of blood too high. The risk in Oklahoma, like I mentioned earlier, is probably 1 in 10 million.
Dr. Brubaker says if you compare the statistics, you'll die from an allergic reaction to a bee sting before you'll get AIDS from a blood transfusion in Oklahoma. Terry Cook, Action 4.
This is something that's been on our minds, the defendants, myself, for 2 years. It's been that long in coming. It's certainly a relief to know that now it has been dismissed, and the only way it can be appealed and heard again is just on that testimony in the federal court. So I'm happy, and we've won one.
This department is a Department of Human Services. It touches probably close to a third of the state's people directly every year, and indirectly it touches us all. And to the extent we have to cut back on those services, it's going to hurt way beyond what people think of usually, which is that we're a welfare agency.
Prison officials say that the state's chronic overcrowding problem is causing hostility among prison inmates. They say inmates are banding together in gangs for protection, and they've seen more disturbances in state prisons in the past several months than they had seen in years prior to that. The most obvious problem is the inmates, something the state has too many of. And the most obvious immediate solution is money, something the state has too little of. Today, wardens from several state prisons told lawmakers something needs to be done now because the situation is getting worse.
Once the season of a long, hot
Summer is upon us. The weak of hot will not set foot in the institution if they are employees, and the incarcerated weak of hot will give up anything to stay alive.
One warden predicted the state will have to replace one or more of its prisons that will be destroyed by rioting. Others suggest if riots don't destroy the prisons, mere overcrowding will. Most of the correction centers are at double capacity already, and the systems are breaking down from overuse. Charles Switzer, News 4, at the state capitol.
These are small vehicles with all the drugs and medicines and equipment on board. They're going to be located in such a way that they'll be first on the scene with a transport unit sent simultaneously. And if CPR needs to be done, they can do it. If an IV needs to be started, the patient, remember now, the days have gone by of the scoop and load. We stabilize patients before we move them and transport them to the ambulances.
I feel if you started at the top of the government and worked down, the money could come out of the government more than out of the students.
Well, as a student, I'm paying for my own education. And so it's going to be rough. I'm going to have to work more hours and not have enough time for study. So I'm probably going to have to take less classes to make good grades.
We need something that will make the school have more, but we also, I think it's a lot to pay. When you have to pay it, it's kind of high.
The overpopulation problem has come to a head at Oklahoma's only women's prison. The Corrections Department says it has simply run out of room to house female inmates. The situation is almost as bad at Oklahoma's men's prisons. Corrections officials claim male inmates are nearly double celled to capacity.
And I'm fearful that people are going to say, now we've solved the corrections problem, because they haven't solved the corrections problem.
Corrections Director Larry Meacham asked his bosses on the State Corrections Board for guidance. Meacham told the board he had notified county sheriffs across the state that he could not accept any new female prisoners. The Corrections Board debated whether to tackle the problem by triple celling inmates or to farm out state prisoners to other agencies. Director Meacham admitted he did not have any simple solutions.
There are no good answers. And I'd like to give you good recommendations as to how to solve this or to guide me. But I am literally at my wit's end and have no good solutions.
The Corrections Board finally agreed to back up prisoners in county jails as long as possible. If that fails, then they'll try to rent prison space in county jails or federal prisons to house state prisoners. Of course, this is just a short-term solution, but the Corrections Board is hoping that they'll get some further relief from the state legislature. Scott Wallace, News 4 at the State Corrections Department.
Yes, we've worked here long.
There are a lot of things that we can do to control our own destiny here, that we do have control over the quality of the product we build. We can be very competitive in the area of cost, things that we can control, and our relationships with our people in our union, these are things we can control.
The child who has this infection will be very ill and can have complications from it, as I said, ranging from ear infection to pneumonia to inflammation of the brain.
Terry Osborne stood eyeball to eyeball with federal judge H. Dale Cook and said he deeply regretted what he did and was ready to suffer the consequences. The judge expressed sympathy but pointed out, as a post office employee, Osborne violated a position of public trust. The sentence, 6 years in prison. Since Osborne worked here, he knows the ins and outs of the federal building and almost evaded our cameras. He was allowed to go home until his prison term begins April 16th. Osborne has said it was simply a matter of filling bags with Oral Roberts mail and leaving them in the post office lobby, then driving his car around and picking them up. His attorney says it began when Osborne was threatened because he couldn't pay gambling debts. Later, with all that money around, he says the temptation to steal was too great to resist, and the act of stealing too easy. Sources say security has since been tightened here. Osborne stored over 100,000 letters here in this East Tulsa mini storage unit until they were discovered accidentally. Before leaving, he told me he was in shock at the severity of his sentence and said he stored the mail because there was too much of it to get rid of. After a while, he said, the letters became a case of out of sight, out of mind.
For the court date and make sure they did sign for the letter.
We spend months tracking down this money or months tracking down the converter, and eventually the cost is passed on to the consumer or to the cable subscriber. So what we're trying to do with these cases is go ahead and draw attention to them and let them know that this really is an offense here, that they really do owe us the converter. The converter is the property of Cox Cable, and those subscribers who have return converters or who do have converters with us end up paying for that in the long run.